My son-in-law looked me dead in the eyes at Christmas dinner and said, "Carol, retirement isn't a financial plan." And the whole table laughed. My daughter laughed. My grandchildren watched Grandma's face, waiting to see if she'd cry or smile. I smiled. What nobody at that table knew was that I had quietly built something over the past 3 years that would make that moment the most embarrassing of Tyler's life. Not because I planned a revenge, not because I wanted to humiliate him, but because the truth came out anyway. And when it did, the room went completely silent in under 10 seconds. I want to tell you exactly what happened, but first, I need to ask you something honestly. Has anyone ever looked at you and decided your best days were already behind you? Because that's exactly what my family had done, and I had let them believe it for far too long. My name is Carol, and when my husband Richard died on an ordinary Tuesday morning, I lost more than the person I loved most. I lost the version of myself that still believed the future had something left for her. He kissed me goodbye, walked out to a routine doctor's appointment, and never came home. No warning, no goodbye, just silence. The kind of silence that fills every room of a house and never fully leaves. People told me grief gets easier with time. What they never mentioned is that loneliness gets louder. For months, I moved through my own home like a visitor. Every evening stretched on forever. Every morning started the same way, with coffee for one and a quietness that felt almost cruel. My daughter, Lauren, called regularly at first. Her husband, Tyler, came by to help with things around the house. I know their intentions were good, but somewhere in that first year, concern slowly became something else. Tyler started explaining my own bank statements to me. He reminded me to be careful online, like I was 12 years old. Once, when I mentioned something I'd read about investing, he laughed and said, "Carol, I think Wall Street will survive without either of us." Everyone laughed. I laughed too because fighting it felt more exhausting than letting it go. That's what nobody tells you about being underestimated. It doesn't arrive loudly. It creeps in through small moments, a laugh here, a dismissive smile there, until one day you realize the people sitting closest to you have quietly decided who you are and what you're still capable of. And somewhere along the way, I had started believing them. Then, 14 months after Richard passed, I was sitting alone at my kitchen table when I stumbled across a video about people selling digital planning tools online. My first thought was, that can't possibly be real. My second thought was, I need to understand exactly how this works. I spent 3 hours researching that first day, then 3 more the next. By the end of that week, something had woken up inside me that I hadn't felt in over a year. Not excitement exactly, something quieter and more serious than that. Purpose. I didn't tell Lauren. I didn't mention it to Tyler. I just opened my laptop the next morning before sunrise and started learning. What happened over the next 6 months would either prove every doubt right or change the story everyone had already written about me. Before the next, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely mean this. Was there ever a moment in your life when someone's low expectations of you quietly pushed you to prove something to yourself rather than to them? Drop it in the comments because I read every single one and I'd really like to know. And if you're finding this story worth your time, hit like and follow along so you don't miss where this goes. The first 6 weeks nearly broke me. I had spent countless hours building planners, budgeting sheets, and organizational templates that I was completely convinced people needed. Then I opened my shop and waited. Nothing. Day after day, I checked my dashboard before coffee and again before bed. A week passed, then 2. Then a full month where I earned less than $20 total. I remember sitting in my kitchen one night, staring at that number, thinking maybe this was foolish. Maybe Tyler was right without even knowing he was right. Maybe there was a reason people my age weren't doing this. That thought scared me more than the empty sales dashboard. Not because I believed it completely, but because part of me was starting to. Then one morning, a single message arrived from a woman named Patricia in Ohio. She had purchased a retirement planning worksheet I almost didn't publish because I thought it was too simple. She wrote that it had helped her organize her finances after losing her husband, and that for the first time in months, she felt like she had some control back. I read that message probably 15 times. Something shifted that morning that no sales number ever could have shifted. I wasn't just making products anymore. I was solving real problems for real people, living through experiences I understood better than most because I had lived them myself. I stopped trying to make things for everyone and started making things specifically for people like me, retirees navigating new budgets, widows rebuilding their lives alone, families managing difficult transitions. Sales didn't explode overnight, nothing dramatic happened, but month after month, the numbers grew steadily and quietly, the way serious things tend to grow. Around that same time, Tyler walked into my kitchen one Sunday afternoon while I was working and asked what I was doing. I explained it as simply as I could. He smiled and said, "Well, as long as it keeps you busy." Keeps you busy. Not builds something, not helps people, not creates real value, just keeps you busy. Lauren laughed softly from the other room. I closed my laptop and made tea and said nothing. That afternoon, I made a decision that I kept for the next 2 years. I stopped talking about my work entirely, not out of bitterness, out of clarity. I understood then that I wasn't going to change anyone's mind with words. The only thing that was ever going to matter was the result. So I went back to work the next morning before sunrise, and I stayed quiet and I kept building. By the end of the second year, the revenue from my little template shop had grown further than I ever imagined when I first started. Then, one ordinary morning, 6 months before Christmas, I opened my dashboard and saw a number that made me log out and log back in twice just to confirm it was real. I want to ask you something before we get to what that number was and what happened next. Has anyone in your life ever dismissed something you were genuinely proud of as just a hobby or just something to keep you busy? Tell me in the comments, because I think more people have felt exactly that than would ever admit it out loud. If someone in your life needs to hear a story like this right now, share this with them today. I refreshed the screen twice, logged out completely, logged back in, checked the number again. It was still there. In the previous 12 months, my kitchen table template business had generated just over $98,000 in revenue. Not millions, not some unbelievable internet fantasy, but nearly $100,000, built entirely alone in the early morning hours while everyone who loved me had quietly decided I was just keeping myself busy. I walked through my house that morning feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not pride exactly, something deeper than that. Richard should have been there. More than anyone in the world, he would have understood what that number actually meant. Not wealth, proof. Proof that 62 is not the end of anything. Proof that grief doesn't have to be the last chapter. Proof that the story other people write about you only has power if you stop writing your own. 6 months later, Christmas Eve arrived. The whole family gathered at my house in Franklin. Turkey roasting, grandchildren arguing over dessert, holiday music drifting from the kitchen. Everything warm and familiar and normal. Then Tyler made his joke about retirement not being a financial plan, and the table laughed, and I smiled and said nothing. A few minutes passed. He leaned back in his chair, swirled his wine, and said, "So, Carol, how's the little online project going these days?" Little. Lauren smiled and said, "Mom's been working on those templates forever." Forever. Like it was a crossword puzzle habit. Tyler chuckled and said, "The important thing is it keeps you busy." My grandson Mason looked at me from across the table and asked, "Grandma, is that what you do every morning on your computer?" I said yes. Tyler grinned and said, "Okay, now I'm actually curious. How much does a template business even make?" The table went quiet, the way rooms go quiet when nobody expects a real answer. I set down my fork. Last year, just over $98,000. Complete silence. Tyler blinked. Lauren stared. My granddaughter Emma's mouth opened and didn't close for a full 3 seconds. Tyler laughed nervously and said, "Wait, seriously?" I said seriously. The look on his face wasn't anger, it was confusion. The version of me he had carried in his head for years had just stopped making sense, and he didn't know what to do with that. Lauren's eyes filled, and she said, "Mom, why didn't you ever tell us?" I smiled and said, "Nobody ever asked." Tyler called a few weeks later and apologized, not for one joke, for years of them. He meant it, and we moved forward, and today we are genuinely fine. But the most important thing that changed that Christmas wasn't Tyler's opinion of me. It was that I finally stopped needing it. The people in your life will sometimes underestimate you, not because of anything you did wrong, but because updating their story about you requires effort they haven't chosen to make yet. Let them keep their old story. You keep building the new one. Reality doesn't need anyone's permission to speak, and when it finally does, it doesn't have to raise its voice at all. If this story hits something real for you, I want to know one thing. What is something you are quietly building or working toward right now that the people around you don't fully see yet? Write it in the comments because those words matter, and putting them out loud, even to strangers, is the first step to believing them yourself. And if someone in your life is quietly doing the work while everyone around them sleeps on them, share this with them right now. They need to hear this today more than you realize.